Good morning. I'm Pete Najarian on this final day of a very, very volatile week. And I'll tell you what, you look at volatility itself, I know it doesn't look all that bad, trading right around 20 and change right now, or almost 21. But the reality is, early in the week, we got as high as over 23. Midweek, we got down towards the 17s. And it's been up and down and up and down. It's been the pathway that we've had all week. We've had a lot of strength and some rebounds, but a lot of pressure on the markets as well at times. And yet, by the end of the week, it really doesn't look all that bad. Sometimes does feel pretty bad. As a matter of fact, yesterday, we did slide in the Dow later as we were going throughout the session and finished the day down about 176 points. But it was the NASDAQ that really stood out because the NASDAQ started off pretty solid. Next thing you know, you start to see this acceleration of sellers come in, and it was almost selling absolutely felt like everything. As a matter of fact, you're down almost 400 points. We actually closed very close to the lows at about 380 points to the downside. That's a pretty extreme move. That's another one of these massive moves and turnaround stories. Started off pretty good. Things looked okay. Then all of a sudden the sellers came out. And what were they really going for? A lot of those high multiple names, but it was a little bit of everything. So I don't want to just say it was just the high multiples, but certainly that was the leadership of the selling that was going on. But before we get to that, volatility, as I mentioned, actually closed above 20. First time this week that we closed above 20. We've been above 20, but closed above 20, right around 2030. We had a good volume day yesterday, almost 43 million contracts trading yesterday. It was a little bit slower at the beginning of the week, and it's accelerated, and we have started to see some very, very nice volumes as it's been flowing in, and obviously makes a lot of sense based upon the kind of volatile movements that we've been getting. Crude, steady kind of a pace, steady Eddie, moving to the upside, actually finished underneath 82, but up there close to that 82 level. And then you look over at the 10-year. We talked about the 10-year as it was getting people a little bit nervous, and I think part of the reason was the velocity of that move. That move that it made up to that 1.8 level really did kind of catch people, I think, off guard because of that. A lot of angst and a lot of questioning about where's it going next, and then all of a sudden we started to get that little bit of a pullback. 172 is where we closed there. So technology yesterday, the absolute meltdown, down about 2.5% for that sector. Semiconductors, they were up nearly 3%. I think they were very close, if not at highs, and then turned and fell like a rock to the downside, finishing the day almost down 2%. Then throw in consumer discretionary and some of those communications. You're talking about down a couple of percent, down nearly 2%. A lot of pressure being put on in a lot of different areas. So I mentioned they were a lot of those high multiple names. Let's just give you a little bit of an idea of what I'm talking about. How about Datadog, Lucid, CrowdStrike, Peloton, NVIDIA. NVIDIA, now we like that name. We all, you hear us talk about it all the time, that and AMD. But let's also remember, and it's something that I think oftentimes gets looked past because those are companies that are so loved in the semiconductor space. They trade at huge multiples. And when you've got those high multiples, they are the ones that a lot of the time people will just close their eyes and say, you know what? I got to get out of some of these until they get to a little bit better level. We'll see. We'll see how much fear is out there because of something like this. But certainly we were seeing a lot of selling, and it was a lot of those high multiple names. Everything wasn't getting sold, but a lot of things. Chinese names are definitely under pressure as well. The airlines yesterday actually were a source of strength. You look at the airlines, you look at some of the cruise ships, actually a pretty good day. Norwegian Cruise Line had a nice day. Delta had a nice day off of earnings. United and American just kind of holding on to the coattails of Delta as it was moving to the upside. Biogen had that little bit of a bounce back after some heavy selling there. And then Kroger actually stood out for me. I found that one and I'm like, wow, that name all of a sudden sticks out. Why? Well, a lot of times people look at names like that as sort of a safety name. They want to be somewhere and they're just looking, and Kroger, it looked like, was one of those names. So we get into today, and what is interesting about today is we're kicking off the financials with, this earnings season. Financials, everybody's focused on that. These big names, obviously, you got J.P. Morgan, you got Wells Fargo, you got Citi. A lot of interest in all of that. Well, J.P. Morgan, well, they did beat. That's been their history. They've done a really good job of beating estimates coming in over the last 4, 5, 6 quarters or so. But the problem has been, it's always been received and then sold. And that's exactly what we were seeing. Now, maybe one of the issues here, just maybe, and I bring this up a lot of the time because when people say, hey, how come you're not in JP Morgan as much as you are in some of these other financial names? When I look at the multiples here, and we're talking about price to book, I'm not talking about PEs, price to book value. This one does trade at a higher level than a lot of the different names within the financial industry. And because of that, great name, got all the respect in the world for Jamie Dimon and everything he has to say and do and how he's approached things as a CEO for so long. Just an amazing guy. He's done an unbelievable job. But the stock does get up to these levels and then suddenly look at today, for instance, with these good numbers. Now, guidance, that wasn't all that great. That was part of the problem as well. You get a stock that was down, I think on the lows, it was down as much as over 6% to the downside. Been bouncing around ever since. But whether it's Omicron or supply chain, you name it, loan growth, all those different things, I got to tell you something. Guidance, I think, is what stood out for me. That was the number one, because when guidance is a little bit weaker, people tend to want to turn and just sell. Take a look at the difference between that name and Wells Fargo, where the guidance was very good. That was in positive territory today, up a couple of percent. As a matter of fact, I think it bumped up against 52-week highs today, well over 57. And just a different way of looking at things. So that's sort of the breakdown of what we saw at the initial financials leading off this earnings season. And that's what essentially we've all been looking forward to today and kicking that off. So early on, you take a look, financials was one of those that was definitely pulling on things. Add to that materials, add to that industrials. Technology was a little bit flat, but you got a lot of pull, especially coming from the financials. JP Morgan definitely having some effects on the Dow and so forth. Dow was down over 250 points in the pre. We were down over 300 points early on. We recovered. I'm not sure where we are right now, but we were down a couple of hundred points over the last 15, 20 minutes or so, somewhere between 170 and about 200 points. The NASDAQ, on the other hand, a little bit different. Matter of fact, early on, they got hit a little bit. Pre-market down about 40. Early, right as we opened, down about 100. That recovered pretty quickly. You take a look over at technology, you look at these sectors, it was very flat early on. Semiconductors, very flat early on. Up a little bit, but not a lot. Then they started to move. Matter of fact, semiconductors made a nice move up nearly 1.5% to the upside. You look over at the technology, that was up about 0.75% to the upside. But then we started to see a little bit more of that easing back off of those levels. So obviously the NASDAQ's been down, been up, and it was starting to pull back down closer to flat. We'll see. It's only the first hour of trade. A lot of things do happen. We got over 21 early on in the volatility index. We pulled back right to about where we were yesterday on the close. As I was coming onto this with the take, it started moving back up on some of that pressure to the downside again and moving back up on the VIX, back up towards that 21 level with the 10-year right around 175. And crude, which had built itself all the way up towards that 83 level once again, kind of sniffing around at that. So something to keep an eye on there in terms of some of the energy names. Matter of fact, speaking of that, Beta Energy was on fire early on as usual. Once again, as you look over at what's going on with crude, you look at Marathon, you look at Diamondback, you look at Devon, you look at ConocoPhillips, all those names. We even have some option activity. I'm not talking about that right now, but XOP did have a little bit of unusual buying to the upside as well already today. Those names are all, many of which are in the XOP. So casinos on fire once again today. They were a little bit under pressure and they bounced right back again. Look at Wynn, you look at MGM, you look at Las Vegas Sands, all having a pretty good day. Chinese names doing okay today as well. PDD, NetEase, JD, all those names doing pretty good. But wow. When you want to look for a little bit of red, just look over at those financials. Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, Sirius Radio, SIRI, Sirius under some very big pressure as well. And some of these other retail type names like a Costco, Ross Stores, Lulu, having a little bit of a troubled day as well, sitting there somewhere in the red. Got two unusuals for you. I will be on the 5 o'clock show tonight with Tyler Matheson. He's going to be hosting that. Tyler always does a fantastic job. Look forward to seeing him tonight on Fast Money. Before I get to that, though, two unusuals right now. Rocket, that's number one. RKT, stock trading about 1370. They were buying puts yesterday in some pretty significant size. They're buying puts again today, looking for more downside in Rocket. Matter of fact, stock was trading just under 14, about 1370. We had a buyer of the March 13 puts, also unusual. They're going out to March. They're not going right here in January. They're not going even in February. They're going out to March. But those 13 puts, those are going for about 85 cents maybe 90 cents was what the prices were at the time when the stock was around 1370, looking for a little bit more of a pullback and rocket. We'll see. Those are always more difficult to look at with the put side of things. Occidental, we talked about some of these beta names in energy. Occidental definitely fits in that category. Stock trading right around 35. We had a buyer of 12,000 of the January 39 calls. Looks like a little bit of that might have been getting rolled up from the January 36 calls. But these January 39 calls, very inexpensive. Obviously, when you look at this, it's going to have to make a pretty significant move in a fairly short period of time. Those are going for about 10 cents or so. Folks, have a great day of trading. Have a great and safe weekend. We look forward to seeing you on Tuesday, Martin Luther King Day this weekend on Monday. See you Tuesday. Look forward to it then. See ya.